Hi everyone, and welcome to this new speed build in The Sims 4. It's been a while since I shared a speed build on the channel. I think it's been like a month or so. And actually since the last speed build, I got the Vampires game pack finally in my game. And it was actually the only pack that I didn't have. Well, since Star Wars, I mean, because I'm not going to get this game pack at all. And I actually got the Vampires pack around the time when there were some suspicions about, the Star Wars game pack, and I was really not excited about a Star Wars game pack, but I really wanted to get some new gameplay, some new items in my game, and I had been resisting in a way to buy the Vampires pack for a few reasons. First of all, I remember when the Vampires game pack came out, or actually was announced, all of the trailers seemed very interesting, and the first gameplays that I saw and let's plays that I saw as well of the Vampires pack were really good, and the gameplay seemed so interesting. But I was a little bit hesitant because I was worried that the vampires would actually annoy me in my everyday gameplay, basically, because even though my gameplay style isn't really realistic in a way, it's inspired by reality, and I don't think that in reality vampires exist. And I don't know, I was afraid that the vampires would just come into my house, drink from my Sims, annoy me all the time, and I saw people actually getting annoyed at some points because vampires were always getting into their houses, drinking from their Sims in the middle of the night. And I was basically just waiting for an update to be able to choose if we wanted to have vampires in one save or not, and just being able to choose if we wanted to have any kind of vampires basically in our game. But that, even to this day, is not yet in the game, but we have had a few updates since then that have improved a little bit more the gameplay, especially with intruders in your houses. And vampires technically cannot get into your house except if you invite them in. And you can also now, through an interaction when you click on a sim, you can just basically send them home without having to talk to them, introduce yourself to them and then ask them to leave. You don't have to do that anymore, you can just send them home. And basically this is what now I do with the vampires, and this is also why I finally decided to get vampires. And honestly, I do not regret my choice, because this game pack, I think, is one of the best game pack that was released for The Sims 4. The gameplay is amazing, the vampire customization is amazing, and the build and buy items are beautiful, and I went crazy in this build with the vampires items, of course. So as you can see, I'm building in Forgotten Hollow, I'm building an inspired Victorian Manor, and I actually looked on Google for some inspiration on a Victorian Manor, and I will leave a link in the description to the pictures that I found of this house. And I only had the front of the house and the right side of the house when you're facing the house, and then I just imagined how I wanted the left side and the back to look like. And honestly, I'm really proud of this house. I really added a lot of little details because of course with this pack you have a lot of wall decors that you can use to make the walls look very old and used and cracked and stuff. And you can also use some spider webs, which I was finally so excited to use because I've always wanted to have those in my game, but they only come with vampires, so of course I couldn't use them until now. And I just really decorated like crazy this build, and I'm so happy with the result. So this manor has 3 bedrooms, one being kind of a butler / maid room. You also have a guest bedroom and of course the main bedroom with an ensuite. And you also have an attic, which is basically where the vampire is supposed to sleep, because of course this house is for a vampire. And I actually have a crazy long story to tell you about the story that I was thinking of as I was building this house. And this story honestly is really dark, I think, compared to the stories that I have imagined so far. And I'm really worried that some of you might be quite uncomfortable when I'm going to tell you the story, because I cannot not tell you the story. It's just, I'm so proud of this story, honestly. I even thought writing it as a short story, because honestly I have images in my head of how things could have gone, basically. But anyway, as I was saying, this house is made for a vampire, so there is a coffin in the attic, and you can only access the attic through the master bedroom. And I was thinking if I were to play in this house to just lock the master bedroom and maybe have a couple of roommates that could be living here. but I'm going to go into more details into that maybe towards the end of the video when I will be telling you the story and when I would have told you the story in its entirety so that you can understand why I'm mentioning roommates. But yeah, there's also, of course, a kitchen, dining, living. You also have an office area, and I've also added a sunroom, and I was thinking maybe that this is the room that the vampire goes in when they want to enjoy some sun without being hit too hard by the sun rays. And of course, you also have the garden. I also placed, of course, a couple garden planters at the back and some tombstones as well. I don't really know why I placed those tombstones. I just thought, you know, it looks really gloomy, so why not? Maybe they've unfortunately sometime killed some people as they were drinking from their plasma, and they had to bury the corpses to hide their crimes, basically. But I'm so proud of this house, and I really hope that you guys will like it. Now, for the story, I was, like I said, so inspired that I actually went ahead and created this sim, or actually started creating this sim. And I will share, if you want to, a picture on my community tab of that sim, who's of course a vampire. And not to toot my own horn, but honestly, she's one of the best looking sim I've ever made in this Sims 4. She's really unique, and honestly, I'm in love with her. She's beautiful, and I think her personality is really interesting. I cannot remember her traits from the top of my head right now, but I remember that her traits were quite interesting, and these were traits that I do not use very often. I think she's self-absorbed and jealous. I'm not sure, but these are traits that I usually never use in my own game, even in my Let's Plays. So yeah, she's really unique, and I really like how she looks. But basically, let me tell you the story. So everything begins around the early stages of the Industrial Revolution, and I was actually thinking of the Industrial Revolution in London, you know, with the foggy London and very gloomy aura that you had there at the time, that was written especially in Dickens. I think this is how you say his name. I'm not sure. I'm sorry if I butchered his name, but anyway, you know, in those old tales that were written during the Industrial Revolution. And the family that was living in this house were, of course, really wealthy. They managed to make a lot of money from railroads and the industry that was flourishing at the time. And they earned a lot of money and managed to buy this house. And because they were so wealthy, they wanted to show off to everyone that they were really wealthy, and they hosted a lot of parties, they had a bunch of guests all the time, but they got really tired of cleaning the house themselves. So because they had so much money, they decided to hire a maid. And they hired Victoria Brodie. Victoria, when they hired her, she was 15, and she was living in a very dirty and unhealthy part of town. Her family was living in a very small apartment. It was basically just a 2-room apartment. They did not even have a bathroom. They had to go into stalls that were in the streets. Well, it was very dirty. And she was basically the only one who could work in her house, because her mother, she was working before. Actually, her family, they used to be farmers, but because of the Industrial Revolution, they lost their land and they had to come into the city to be able to find jobs. And her father found a job, her mother found a job as well as maid. Her father was working in the industry. I don't really know what kind of industry, probably the railroads or something. But after a while, her mother started feeling really ill, and she unfortunately could not work anymore because it was really painful for her to just be on her feet all day. And then just get up from her bed was becoming very difficult. And then her father was the only one who was able to bring in some money into the household and be able to feed the house. But one morning her father was like, okay, I'm gone to work, bye-bye, and he basically never came back. No one knows what happened to him, if he died at work or if he just vanished, if he decided to abandon his family, no one knows. And Victoria, at the time, she was around 14, 15, which back then was, you know, she was an age to actually be able to find a job. And she managed to find a job, as I said, as a maid. And she started working for the family that was living in this house. At first, you know, when she first met them, she had a very good contact. You know, they had a good chat, they had, you know, they seemed to be really nice people, and they seemed to be willing to take care of her and help her as much as they could. But after a while, I don't know if it was the wealth or maybe the fact that they were really successful in their industry or whatever, and maybe, you know, all of the parties that they threw to show off to people that they were really wealthy and successful, maybe that kind of got into their heads and they started being a bit more mean to Victoria, and as time went by, they started really humiliating and being really violent with Victoria during the parties because they asked her to serve food at the party, to be the waitress basically, but then once the party was done, they asked her to clean the entire house before she left because they wanted to wake up to a very clean and shiny house. So Victoria had to work really late at night, and often she left the house around 3 or 4 in the morning and she had to be back to work around 9 or 10 in the morning. And she had to walk back home when it was really foggy and dark and cold. And usually when you're walking in the city at night, you hear noises that you usually don't hear during the day. And it was really creepy and freaky for her. And at first she was really scared. But once again, as the years went by, she got used to coming home so really late and she wasn't as scared anymore. And one night, once again, the family threw a party and once again they humiliated her. They were really abusive with her and they were really mean people, and she had no idea if they realized how mean they were. And even if, I don't personally even know if they realized how mean they were. I just think they were enjoying their wealth and their status, basically. But as usual, they asked her afterwards to clean the entire house, which she did, and the house was beautiful, really shiny, clean. They could have eaten from the floor, off the floor, you know, without getting any sickness or anything. It was just perfect. So she left the house, she started walking back home, and she got used, you know, after a while of all of the noises that she heard in the streets at night. But that night, she felt kind of a presence behind her, and that made her feel very uneasy. And at some point, she heard something behind her, so she turned around to see nothing behind her. And as she turned back, she saw a few meters away from her a shadow, someone staring at her. And that person started walking forward to her, telling her how beautiful she is, that they've seen her the past few weeks and that they've fallen in love with her. And when she tried to walk backwards to avoid facing that person, the person was walking faster towards her. And at some point, the person was just centimeters away from Victoria. She could, if they had a breath, she could have smelled their breath, but she realized that that person wasn't a person, and when she thought that it was time to run, the person grabbed her, hugged her, and she felt a painful sting in her neck. And the person was in fact a vampire, and they were telling her how beautiful she was, that she was the most beautiful thing that they had ever seen, and that they wanted to keep her close to them forever. But I don't think that vampire had mean intentions, to be honest. I just think that they had no control. Maybe they hadn't drank for a few days, maybe they were really thirsty, or I don't know. But they drank so much from her that Victoria was, as they thought, actually almost dead. And there, I'm actually not taking inspiration from The Sims when it comes to how vampires are turned. I'm highly taking inspiration from the TV show True Blood, which is one of my favorite TV show, by the way. If you've never seen it, I need to warn you, it's quite graphic. Like, really, it's really graphic, but the musics are really nice. The characters, I think, are really cool, and I really like their reactions. And even though not all of these seasons are really great, the first ones, at least, I really enjoy. So if you haven't seen this TV show, this series, I would highly suggest you watch it. But once again, I warn you, it's really graphic, but I really like it. And basically, in that TV show, when a vampire turns another human into a vampire, basically what they do is that they drink as much blood as needed from their victim, basically from their human. And when they're at the threshold between life and death, they give them a couple drops of their own blood, and then they bury themselves together in the soil, in the ground. And then overnight, or actually overnight, over the entire day, there's some kind of magic that happens and some energy that they share underground. And in the next night, the human is supposed to wake up as a vampire, basically coming out of the ground and waking up from the dead, basically. And there they are as a vampire. And then they have this strange relationship, like the creator and the progeny, like the parent and the child. It's a really strange relationship, but it's actually really cool. I really like this idea, this lore. I actually really like that. And this is pretty much how I think Victoria was turned into a vampire. That vampire, when they realized how much they had drank from her, because they didn't want to lose her, they decided to turn her into a vampire. So what they did is that they gave her a little bit of their plasma, because we're in The Sims, and it's plasma, it's not blood. And then they buried themselves in the park that they were just next to for the entire day. And the next evening, the vampire woke up and waited for Victoria to wake up. But she didn't wake up. So what they did is that they thought that they had messed up the transformation process, so they just decided to bury themselves again with her, hoping that it would actually help her. And the next evening, they woke up again to realize that she once again didn't wake up, and they realized that maybe they might have killed her and that it was time for them to move on. And they just left. A day passed, and the next evening, Victoria finally woke up. And she woke up by herself, and she did not realize that almost 3 days had passed since that incident. And she felt this hunger that she had never felt before. She thought that she, was just done with her day of work, or actually her night of work, and that she was yet to come home, that she had to go home to finally go to sleep, eat something. And she felt as if she was getting sick, because that hunger, she had never felt that before. And she had no recollection whatsoever of what had happened. She just remembered that weird shadow, but she thought maybe she hit her head or something, she tripped and something happened. She didn't know, no one was there, so she just walked back home. And once she arrived, and here I should have checked, but I didn't. I don't remember if it was during I think it was during the Victorian era, maybe 1600s, 1700s. In the houses, when someone was gone, the family members left a candle at the window to help them find their way back home, or at least that's what I remember. Or maybe I'm wrong, and it was, they placed a candle at the window to help the spirit of someone who was gone in the house to find their way out of the house, to avoid the house being haunted and everything. I'm not sure about those two things. If you know more about me on that, please let me know in the comments. But I should have checked, I didn't, I'm sorry. But the idea that I had behind that is that when Victoria arrived at her house, she saw a candle at the window and she knew that something bad had happened. And she went almost through the door. She almost destroyed the entire door because, of course, now she was a vampire. But she didn't know that yet, and she had this strength that she was not aware of. And when she came into the house, she saw her mother lying in the bed, and she was gone. And something that I actually forgot to mention was that Victoria had a little sister and a little brother. Her little brother was really young compared to her. He was like almost 10 years younger than her. And her little sister was like 3 or 4 years younger than her. And when she came into the house, she saw, like I said, her mother lying dead in the bed, and she saw her little sister wearing black next to her mother crying, and she was really surprised to see Victoria stumble through the door like that, because once again, Victoria was gone for 3 days. And the first thing she did was to hug her sister, and she told her that their little brother had been taken away because he was way too young to be in a house where no one was working, and the neighbors thought that it was best for him to be placed in an orphanage, and they had been taken away from them. And Victoria, she heard her sister, but she was thirsty. And she couldn't control herself, just like actually they cannot in The Sims 4. And she had to drink from her sister, and because there was no one to help her control her thirst, she unfortunately killed her sister. Like I told you, this story is really, really dark, And I'm really, really sorry if it's way too dark for you. I'm so sorry, but it was what I thought of, and I think, I don't know, I was kind of proud of that story. Anyway, when Victoria finally came back to her senses and realized what she had done, she also realized what she actually was, and she had read in books what vampires were and what they were capable of. And that's when she realized what she was. And she decided to, of course, bury her mother and sister and grieve them, and then she started looking for her little brother. She had no idea where he was, but she thought she had eternity to find him. Eventually she found the orphanage that he was in, but he was already quite old, and he was working actually to start running the orphanage. And actually she learned afterwards that when her brother got into the orphanage, he was just like all of the new orphans that got into the orphanage, bullied and kind of, you know, people were not really nice to him, but he worked hard enough to be able to eventually run the orphanage and save the new orphans from being bullied. And he eventually became the director of the orphanage. He never married, and he never really felt the need to have children because he always felt like the orphans that entered the orphanage were his children. And he was loving them all equally and helping them equally, and he actually saved many children from living in the streets, and he allowed them to have a good education, to find a good job, and to have opportunities in life. And her sister, she kept an eye on him to avoid anything happening to him that was similar to what had happened to her, basically. But eventually her brother, he was aging up. He was getting older, but she wasn't. At the time when Victoria was turned, I think she was maybe 19, maybe 20 years old at the most, but she wasn't old at all. And when she realized that her little brother technically was older than her, it started hurting her, you know, and she kept an eye on him until the day he passed, and she made sure that his legacy lived on. And this orphanage, even to this day, still saves many children and allows them to have good education and opportunities in life. And this is something that she still, to this day, keeps an eye on. But when her brother passed, Victoria felt sad and angry because he aged and she didn't. And she needed to blame someone for the passing of her entire family. She needed to blame the person who turned her into a vampire to have taken away from her everything she loved and everything she cared about. And so she started hunting this vampire, and as she was hunting them, she was learning a bit more about them, but also about the vampiric lore and what vampires were actually capable of and how you could actually get rid of a vampire. And she learned about this potion that could remove the vampirism from a vampire, basically, and make them a human again. And the research that she's done on this vampire, she realized that they were actually really proud of being a vampire, that this was what actually made them who they are. And she decided that to get revenge, she would take away this vampirism from them, and she would have them get old and make sure that they would never turn back into a vampire until the day they passed. She eventually found that person, she fought them, and of course, once again, she had trained, and she won the battle, and she turned them back into a human. And she made sure, for decades, that that person would never turn back into a vampire. And when the day that person passed away, she honestly thought that she would feel relieved because she would have had revenge, but all she felt was emptiness and loneliness. And she was so sad to realize that she was all alone, with no one else to blame than herself, because the person that she could have blamed was gone, and she technically had revenge on them, but she still felt really lonely and sad. So she started hanging out with people her age, or actually the age that she looked like, but once again, every time these people aged, but she didn't. And you know, technology was advancing and things were changing, and we're actually getting closer to the time we're at now in real life. And she read in some articles and books and, you know, scientific books and stuff, I don't know, scientific magazines, that scientists were looking for AI, trying to work on AI. And she discovered that a university, the Foxbury Institute was actually working on robotics to study the AI and the ability to create life through a machine. And that's something that she actually was really interested in, because she had tried to settle in with some vampires, but she didn't like the way they saw human Sims. She didn't like the fact that they always saw themselves above the Sims, as if they were better than them. And even though Victoria sometimes has this feeling that she's better than the humans, she always remembers her little brother and how humble he was, and she tries once again to respect his legacy by trying to be humble herself. But it's really hard when you're actually really stronger than the rest of humanity. So she struggles sometimes with that, but she didn't want to hang out with people who were on purpose kind of mean and condescending to other living beings around them. So this AI thing was something that she was really interested in, because she thought that she could basically create her own friends and live with them for eternity. Because even though she could have turned herself back into a human, she kind of got used to being a vampire as well, and she liked the power, she liked the secret of being a vampire. And even though she was scared most of the time of being discovered, she was actually really proud of being who she is, and she felt more and more like herself every day. And she wanted to try this AI thing, and this is basically where I would start playing as her. Because also something that I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, I'm kind of going back and forth, but something I forgot to mention is that after a while, once, that vampire that she had turned back into a human passed away, Victoria needed a house to settle in and to host parties at, and she found this Victorian Manor here, which was actually the manor that she used to work at, and she decided to buy this manor, to get it as if, she inherited it, from the old owners, basically. And it was kind of also of her, her revenge on the people who abused her when she was a human still, and that she was still a teenager, and that they took advantage of her, basically. And they humiliated her, and it was her way of getting back at them by owning their house and being the owner of the house, basically. And she tried to take care of the house as much as she could, but she didn't want to, clean everything just like she did before. The only room that's really cleaned, basically, is the attic, because this is where she spends most of her time. But yeah, she got this house back, kind of a revenge, back to getting back at the people who abused her as well. But yeah, if I were to play with Victoria, I would start with her, of course, living alone in this house, but also joining the Foxbury Institute, and probably asking maybe some students if they want to stay at her house, and allowing them, to sleep in the butler's room or in the guest's room. Of course, the master bedroom would be for her, because she wouldn't want to reveal that she's a vampire and that she doesn't sleep in a bed. But she could have maybe a couple roommates whilst she's studying the robotics. And she could sometimes drink from those roommates, because why not? She still drinks from Sims, but she's always very careful to not drink too much from them, and I think it could be quite fun to play with a vampire in university who's trying to create a servo or a plumbot. I don't remember how they're called in The Sims 4. But yeah, create this machine that could eventually become her friend, and in the meantime also hang out with some students and allow them to stay at her house, and use them for socializing, but also for food, because once again she's a vampire. And I think it could be fun to play also with this duel that she could have inside of her, that she needs to respect the human Sims, but also she's a vampire and she wants to drink from them, But yeah, I was so proud of this storyline that I found when I was building this house. And like I said, I started creating Victoria, and she's beautiful. Honestly, once again, I don't think I've ever created a Sim as beautiful as Victoria. And I'm so sorry if this story is really dark, but I don't know, it was just perfect for the vampire pack. And this pack, honestly, I think is the darkest content that we've ever got in The Sims 4. And that's, I think, why this pack is also so appreciated. It's because it allows the people to actually go deep into their storylines and to allow themselves to get crazy, basically, and really try to add some real life stuff into something that's supernatural. And I don't know, it's a good way to express some ideas, some stories, basically. And I don't know what you guys think about this story. I hope it wasn't too dark for you. If it was, I'm really, really sorry. I was just so proud of this house yes, and this story as well, that I just really needed to share it with you. And also, you guys seem to really enjoy when I'm telling the stories that I'm thinking when I'm building a house, that I couldn't skip. You know, I couldn't avoid telling you that story, because that's something that I tried also to reflect in this house. Like, the house is clean, but not too much, and it has some modern furniture, but not too much as well. And of course, by the way, I've also used a lot of items from Realm of Magic, because I really think that the wood tones and the colors and the items overall that come with Realm of Magic really match as well the items that come with the Vampires pack. And I've also used some items from Cats and Dogs and Discover University, because also these items look quite old and it really looks great in this house. But I'm so glad that I finally got the Vampires pack. I've played with it quite a bit already, but I did not, you know, I was just to experiment and discover the pack, so I just basically created a very, very quick vampire, and then I just explored the gameplay. But it's really fun, and I think in University it would add even more of a challenge, you know, to try and hide the vampires' secrets, you know, that they are a vampire, but also trying to feed them without having anyone seeing them, to not be discovered as being a vampire. And I don't know, I think it can be quite fun to play this way. But yeah, I'm really curious to know what you guys think about this house and about this story as well. And I was thinking that maybe one day I could maybe do a let's play on vampires with Victoria in this house, and trying to make a servo so that she could have a friend forever and not be alone anymore. But I don't know when that would happen, because it's definitely not something that I would like to do soon, you know. I still need to finish creating Victoria and finishing her outfits and who she would really be now as a vampire. And I think she would be like 300 years old, so she would have changed from the time she was a human. But yeah, I still need to think out a few details on this story, but I think that one day I will do a let's play with Victoria, and I would be really curious to know if you guys would be interested in seeing a let's play with Victoria in this house with Discover University as well. But anyway, that's pretty much all I had to say about, well, the story and the house, basically, because the house, it's just Victorian, and I try to imagine each room, you know, with its own story and who would be living in each room, you know. It's basically always the same thing when I'm building. So yeah, that's pretty much all I had to say. So I really hope that you guys like this house, that you've enjoyed the story. Sorry if it was a little bit too dark for you, I would completely understand. I'm really sorry if it hurt you in any way, but it was the story that I thought of. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I really hope that you will enjoy the rest of this video.